Good morning once again, and welcome to our discussion on principles of economics. In our last session, we were talking about interdependence and gains from trade. How two individuals and two countries they can engage themselves in mutually beneficial trade. And we were discussing this gains from trade using a simple economic model, which is production possibility frontier. And we said that the basis of trade is actually depending on comparative as well as absolute advantage. By absolute advantage, we meant that if a country is producing a particular commodity using less amount of input, then we'll say that the country has an absolute advantage in producing that commodity. And comparative advantage, on the other hand, is defined on the basis of opportunity cost. So, that means if a country has lower opportunity cost in producing one commodity, then we will say that that country has comparative advantage in that particular commodity. In yesterday's example, we were talking about the United States and Japan producing two commodities, wheat and computer. And then we said that even though the United States, they have absolute advantage in producing both the commodities, it is still possible for them to engage in mutually beneficial trade because Japan has comparative advantage in producing computer. It means opportunity cost of computer in terms of wheat is lower in Japan compared to the opportunity cost of computer in terms of wheat in the United States. And how do you measure opportunity cost? We have discussed several times by the slope of the straight line production possibility frontier. So, if you want to measure the opportunity cost of computer, then that commodity you have to measure along the x-axis. Why this is so? Because opportunity cost we discussed, it is rise over run. So, obviously, if you measure the commodity along the x-axis, then you can measure to get one additional unit of computer how much wheat production you are sacrificing. That is why rise over run, that is the slope. Now, in today's discussion, we are going to talk about market forces, which is a very important topic in microeconomics. Market forces. So, this is market forces. So, first of all, we have already discussed what is market, right? Market is basically, as we discussed earlier, market is a medium that helps or facilitate exchange between buyers and sellers. Okay, there are different types of market depending on how many buyers and sellers interact in that market. If there are n number of buyers and sellers, we call that market as competitive market. That means large number of buyers and sellers. If there is only one seller in the market, we call that market as monopoly market. In between these two extremes, there are oligopolistic market and monopolistically competitive market. We will discuss those in a later part of our discussion when we will talk about market in detail. Now, when we talk about market forces, that means there are some forces that work in a market to determine equilibrium level of price and quantity actually. Okay, equilibrium level of price and quantity. And what are the forces? Those two forces are actually, when I talk about forces or market forces, it is basically demand and supply. Now, these two concepts, demand and supply, are so important in economics in general, and microeconomics in particular, that if you can understand demand and supply very well, you will think that you have understood 50% of our economics. That means application and demand and supply, application of demand and supply is very profound in all the economics discussion. So we'll start with demand, and then we'll talk about supply, and then we'll talk about how demand and supply interact as a market force to determine price and quantity. So we'll start with demand function. Now you might have already studied function in your 12th level uh, mathematics. So when I say y is a function of x, so how do we write? This is the way we write: y equals to fx, means y is a function of x. So therefore, when I say demand function, let's say QD indicates demand for a particular commodity X. So QD is basically demand for X, and that is a function of, can you think of what are the factors that will determine the demand for X? Let's say X denotes wheat. Okay, X denotes wheat. So obviously, when we are talking about demand for wheat, the most important factor that will determine demand for wheat is the price of wheat. Okay. What are the other factors, other important factors that will determine demand for wheat? You can easily understand that income of the individual. Okay. Without income, we cannot buy anything. So this is income. What else? Maybe the price of related product. Let us assume that price of related product is Y. Maybe the price of rice, which is a related product. Okay. If price of wheat is too much, probably consumers will switch from wheat to rice. It's quite natural. Similarly, if the price of rice is too much, then the consumers will shift towards wheat consumption. That is why price of related product is also important in demand for that particular commodity, which is wheat in this particular context. What else is there? Apart from these three factors, we can also understand taste and preference of the customer. Taste and preference, T. Because if I don't like wheat, even though its price is too low, I may not buy that much wheat. On the other hand, if I have so much fascination for wheat or chapati, even though price is little higher, I might have to go for wheat consumption. So it all depends on taste and preference of the consumer. So these are the four important factors that determine. There are many other factors, but these are the most important factor that determine the demand for a particular commodity, here wheat. Now, among these factors, while discussing demand and supply, we will consider price of that particular product only, and we will assume the other factors are constant, at least in the short term. So that means we will represent the demand supply in a diagram considering these income, price of related product, taste and preference are given. Instead of constant, we can say it's a given. This I, Py and T, they are also known as parameter. And this Px and Qx, they are known as variable. They are known as variable. Now, what is the difference between parameter and variable then? We all know that variable can change quickly. That means over a short span of time, variable can change. But parameter, they don't change so quickly. Okay, for parameter to change, it requires some amount of time. For example, if you think about price of wheat, today if it is 50 rupees per kg, tomorrow morning itself when you go to the market, you can see it is either 55 rupees or 45 rupees or 40 rupees. So, it is possible that the price of wheat will change overnight. But income, suppose you have a monthly income of 50,000 rupees today, tomorrow morning you cannot get 20,000 income. Or price of related product, when you are considering price of related product, also we assume to be parameter. Similarly, taste and preference. If today you have some preference for wheat, tomorrow morning itself your preference cannot shift from wheat to rice consumption. So, that is why we will assume these are parameter, these are variable, and then we will represent this in a diagram. Now, when you consider y equals to fx, we believe y is dependent on x. That means y is the dependent variable, x is independent variable. And how do you represent that? You should have x over here and y over here. The dependent variable should always be measured along y axis. But interestingly, please keep in mind, when we think about demand function, where demand q is a function of price, interestingly we represent price on the x axis and y axis and quantity in the x axis, and this is the demand function. This is really interesting, that even though our mathematical relationship says that the dependent variable should be measured on the y axis and independent variable should be measured along the x axis, when we represent demand function, we just do the opposite thing, right? We just do the opposite. That means we write demand on the y axis and price on the y axis and quantity demand in the x axis, right? Okay, that means this demand function is known as inverse demand function. Please keep in mind, this is inverse demand function. So, throughout our discussion, we will be discussing only about inverse demand function. Then what is the meaning of this? Okay, what is the interpretation of this demand function, or rather inverse demand function? Let's say Q is basically demand for ice cream. Okay, demand for ice cream. So, total, let's say there are 10 units of ice cream. For the first unit of ice cream, if you draw a line up to the demand function, so this will give you what is your maximum willingness to pay for the first unit of the ice cream. What I am saying? Maximum willingness to pay. So that means interpretation of the inverse demand function, it indicates maximum WTP, willingness to pay, for each unit each unit of the good. So when I go to the second unit, let's say this is my second unit, then this is the maximum willingness to pay. For the third unit, this is the maximum willingness to pay. For the fourth unit, this is the maximum willingness to pay. For the fifth, this is this. Okay. Now, one thing is very clear, that maximum willingness to pay, maximum WTP falls as we increase our consumption. Now, why this is so? Why the maximum willingness to is falling? It is because diminishing marginal utility. So, this can be explained by diminishing marginal utility. What does it mean actually? Utility is nothing but what is the satisfaction you get if you consume 1 unit of ice cream. Now, think logically, when you consume the first unit of ice cream, you get so much satisfaction, no, for the first unit. But if I offer you one more ice cream, of course you will enjoy, but that enjoyment would be lower than what was there for the first unit. Then again, if I offer you a third unit, you will enjoy, but that enjoyment would be even lower than the second unit. If I keep on giving you ice cream, then at your demand for ice cream is getting saturated, no? Because how many ice cream you will consume? So that means for each successive unit, your demand or satisfaction is going down, and as a result of which maximum willingness to pay is actually going down. Because the maximum willingness to pay depends on how much value we attach to that particular commodity. So, it depends on value attached to a particular good. So, when I am consuming the first unit of ice cream, I am attaching too much value. It is quite valuable for me. But when I am consuming the second unit, since the marginal utility, that means additional utility is diminishing, I am attaching less value, as a result of which my maximum willingness to pay is also going down. Likewise, for the third unit, it is even lower, for the fourth, for the fifth, for the sixth, it is continuously going down. Okay. In this case, it has touched the x-axis. It may not, in case it may not touch, it would be asymptotic. Okay. That means it will approach the x-axis to an infinite horizon. That means for each successive unit, I am getting very, very minute level of marginal satisfaction. Okay. So, that way, this diminishing marginal utility can also explain why this demand function is actually downward sloping. And this downward sloping demand curve, so downward sloping demand curve also explains the law of demand. What is that law of demand? As price increases, quantity demand falls, and vice versa. That is called law of demand. That means an inverse relationship between P and Q. That is law of demand. So, what we have learned? We have learned the idea of demand function, where quantity demand is a function of price, but when we represent price on the y-axis and quantity demand in the x-axis. Therefore, it is known as inverse demand function. And what is the economic interpretation of the inverse demand function? Inverse demand function at each point of the inverse demand function indicate the maximum willingness to pay of the consumer for that particular unit. Okay, and each successive unit of the commodity represent lower willingness to pay. Why? Because of the diminishing marginal utility. So that means there are two things. One is called demand and another one is called quantity demanded. Okay, demand and quantity demanded. This entire relationship AB, this is called a demand curve. However, a particular point on the demand curve, let us say this is Q1. So, Q1 is quantity demanded when price is P1. Similarly, Q2 is quantity demanded when price is P2. Q3 is quantity demanded when price is P3. Q4 is quantity demanded when price is P4. Q5 is quantity demanded when price is P5. So, while the entire relationship between price and quantity gives you the demand schedule or demand curve, a particular point on the demand curve indicates quantity demanded. So, these two distinctions you have to clearly keep in mind. So, I will write it down: quantity demanded, and demand. Okay. So, while quantity demanded is a particular point, that means Q1, Q2, Q4, these are all quantity demanded at P1, P2 and so on. And demand is basically the entire relationship which is given by AB. So, to draw a demand curve or demand schedule, you should have information on quantity demanded at so many level of price. So, if I tell you that a consumer consumes 5 units of ice cream when the price per ice cream is 3 rupees, you cannot buy a demand curve, because I am only telling you a particular point, that is called quantity demanded. So, I have to again tell you, when the price is 4 rupees, how much the consumer will buy. When the price is 2 rupees, how much the consumer will buy. I have to also tell you, when the price is 6 rupees, how much you will buy. So, I need different coordinates. Okay. So, entire relationship between price and quantity will give you the demand schedule, while a particular point on the demand curve or demand schedule is known as quantity demanded. So, one single point is not sufficient to draw a demand curve. When I am telling you that at price 10, how much apples you are buying, that means you are only telling me quantity demanded when price is 10. I cannot draw the demand curve. To draw the demand curve, I need information on your quantity demanded at different levels of prices. Okay, this is what we have learned. One more thing we have to keep in mind. willingness to pay or maximum willingness to pay and what we actually pay in the market, these are two different things. So, what I am saying, maximum willingness to pay and actual payment are two different things. Okay, these are two different things. All right, how much we actually pay, that depends on what is the supply in the market for that particular commodity. Demand alone cannot tell us what should be the price. So, that is why from the inverse demand function, we can only get to know about maximum willingness to pay. But how much we will actually pay in the market, that depends on another force. Our topic is market forces. So far, we have discussed only one force, which is demand. So, one force of the market cannot determine the price. Therefore, till now, we are not able to tell how much actually we are paying for each unit of ice cream in the ice cream market. Because I don't know in that particular day what is the supply of ice cream. That is why now we need to introduce the second force of the market, which is supply function. So, applying the analogy of the demand function, we can easily get to know the sub-concept of supply function. If the demand function indicates the maximum willingness to pay of the consumer for each and every unit of the commodity, obviously you can understand supply function should come from the supplier's perspective. Demand function is defined from the buyer's perspective. Supply function should come from the supplier's perspective. How? Let us discuss about that supply function. Okay, so now we'll discuss about supply. So, can you think of what should be the analogy of supply which we can get from the demand curve? So, you might be thinking, if it is maximum willingness to pay for the consumer, this should be maximum willingness to receive to supply one unit. But that is incorrect. The moment I say from the supplier of ice cream point of view, if I think what is the maximum price that the supplier of ice cream wants to receive for each unit of the ice cream. For the first unit, let us consider. Now, there is no limit on maximum, no, there is no upper bound, because supplier wants to get as much as you can give, no? Why should there be a bound on the upper side? So, that is why it is not the maximum willingness to receive, rather it should be the minimum amount that the supplier must receive to supply the first unit of ice cream. Now, when you go to the second unit, what should be the willingness to pay? The minimum willingness to pay for each successive unit should go up. So, that is why the supply curve is upward sloping. Supply curve is upward sloping. This is the supply function. Now the question is, why is this supply function upward sloping? Supply function indicates, as I told you, the minimum willingness to receive for each unit to supply. Now the question is, how the supplier determines the minimum willingness to pay? Can you think minimum willingness to receive? I am the supplier of an ice cream and I am supplying ice cream. For the first unit, I am now considering what should be the minimum price that I must receive so that I can supply the first unit. Obviously, that depends on what is my cost of production. When I am supplying the second unit, what is the extra cost that I am incurring? When I am supplying the third unit, what is the extra cost that I am supplying? That I am incurring to supply the third unit. That means, in a way, minimum willingness to receive, it depends on my marginal cost of production. That is why supply function is nothing but upward sloping marginal cost function. So, this is nothing but marginal cost of production. If I cannot get that additional cost from supplying that additional unit, then it is meaningless for me to supply that. So, I must get minimum that price to cover my cost of production. That is why minimum willingness to receive, or MWR, minimum willingness to receive, MWR, depends on marginal cost of production. Okay, that is why supply function is upward sloping, but demand function is downward sloping, because maximum willingness to pay goes down as we keep on consuming the product because of diminishing marginal utility. So, now we know demand function, now we know concept of supply function. Likewise, when I know supply of a particular commodity, we were discussing about wheat or ice cream, whatever you may call it. Let us say this is supply, quantity supply, or I can write QS to get a parity, QS for the same commodity X is actually a function of, what are the factors that will determine? Obviously, again, price of X, okay. Then what should be the other factors? Your price of related product, because if price of rice is too much, as a farmer, I have less incentive to produce wheat, because now I see rice becomes more profitable. Okay, and then your technology, okay, your technology, because technology will determine what is the cost of production, so on and so forth. Maybe weather, okay. So, there are many other factors. So, again, price of X will be considered as variable and all other factors will be considered as parameter. Okay. So, price of X directly impacts demand and supply both, and it changes quickly. That is why Px and Qx, they are known as variable, while other factors are considered as parameter, because they change some time, they take some time to change. All right. Once we know demand and supply, now we can easily understand how do they interact. So, in this diagram, then what I will do, I will now interact demand and supply. Let us say this is my new diagram, Q here and P here. This is my demand function, and let us say this is my supply function. This is supply, this is demand. So, demand supply interaction will determine the equilibrium price and quantity. Okay. So, P star and Q star, they are called equilibrium price and quantity in the market. Now, why are they called equilibrium? They are called equilibrium. Equilibrium means actually market clearing. Which means a price that clears the market. That means there should not be excess supply or excess demand in the market, right? So, equilibrium, we said that demand and supply, these two forces, they interact with each other, and then that determine equilibrium price. What does equilibrium price means? That is also known as market clearing price. That means at that price, whatever the buyers wants to buy, the suppliers are also selling that much unit. So, that is why there is no excess supply, there is no excess demand. But one interesting thing is happening here. Now, see, for the first unit of ice cream, your willingness to pay was this much. Let us say that is P1. But you are paying only P star, because when we go to ice cream market, whatever might be our quantity demand, we will say that today price is 5 rupees per cone of ice cream. But my willingness to pay for the first unit was much higher. That is why we said willingness to pay and what we actually pay is quite different. Actual payment is determined by the market forces, demand and supply. This is P star. Okay, I will pay P star for whatever quantity of ice cream I want to buy. For the second unit of ice cream, my willingness to pay was this much. Let us say that is P2. But again, I am paying P star only. So, for the third unit, my this thing was P3. For the fourth unit, this is P4. But I am paying only P star. So, that means for each successive unit, I am maintaining some amount of surplus. Okay, I am maintaining a surplus for each successive unit. And when I buy total OQ amount of ice cream or whatever quantity you may call it, then I am having a total surplus of this triangle. Look at this. Okay. Since for each unit of the good consumed, since for each unit of the good consumed, maximum willingness to pay is higher than actual payment, consumer maintains a surplus. Okay, consumer maintains a surplus, and total surplus is known as consumer surplus. Which is denoted by this triangle. So, this is known as consumer surplus or CS. How it is defined? The area below the demand curve but above the price line. Okay. So, consumer surplus is defined as the area which is above the price but below the demand curve. Okay, above the price line but below the demand curve. And mathematically, how do you get it? Mathematically, how do you get it? It is basically CS is defined as total willingness to pay minus total payment in actual. So, if you give a name A, B, this is let us say C, this is the area A, B, C in the diagram. Okay, and you can easily understand how to measure the area equals to half into AB into AP. Let us say this is sorry AB into AC. All right. So, AB you know, AB is the total area consumed, and how to get that AC area, this area also you can easily get, because you know the total AC unit, total AC, what is the distance between this point to C amount. So, a price at which quantity demand becomes 0. So, you can easily understand if you know the demand function, the equation of the demand function, you can easily put a price which makes the quantity demand 0. Okay. What should be the price at which Q equals to 0? That is the total distance OC. From there, if you subtract OP star, that means the equilibrium price, you will get this distance. Easy to understand, right? So, that means we have learned a very important concept here which is called consumer surplus. What is the total willingness to pay minus actual payment? So, total willingness to pay, basically how do you measure total willingness to pay? A, Q, B, C. This is the total willingness to pay. Okay. For when you are buying Q star amount, if you know the equation of the demand function, you can easily integrate that using integral calculus, you can get it. Minus, you can easily get this AQ, AO into this. So, that means actual payment, price into quantity. If you do, easy to calculate the area of this. Okay. And then you can find out what is your consumer surplus. Total willingness to pay minus actual payment, which will give you the area ABC, which is known as consumer surplus.